the content on there is so diverse. From, yes, the stupid dance videos and really ridiculous jokes to really funny, creative, clever, well-produced content to a whole lot of educational material. And I have always felt like education does not need to stay within the institution. I think if we're really doing our jobs, information needs to go to where the people are. And that's why I worked with Extension for so long, because I felt like it met that mission very well. But TikTok is, like it or not, that is where our next generation of academics and scientists and leaders in our community, that's where they are.
Greetings, fellow explorers, and welcome to the 19th episode of Geekoscopy 101, the podcast that explores the nexus between science, story, wonder, and philosophy with me, your host, Dr. Janis Kisten. And today we're exploring plants, plant people, and podcasting with the Plant Prof himself, Dr. Vikram Baliga of Planthropology. Okay, welcome to the show, Dr. Baliga. How are you doing?
I am doing really well today. Trying to stay warm. It's getting pretty cold here where I live, but I'm doing well overall.
Yeah, we had a little bit of a chat earlier about how different our weather situations are right now. You guys are freezing there and I'm busy melting away here. And so that's the interesting thing about being able to communicate so far across the world so easily. So much different perspectives that can come together at a single point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. We, I'm in the U.S. in Texas, and I think people typically think that it's pretty hot in Texas, and that's true for most of the state, but it's a big state, and we have this huge cold front coming in today, and it's looking like we may hit temperatures this weekend of -5 Fahrenheit, which is about -20, 21 Celsius, and get 8 to 10 inches of snow. It's going to be quite an adventure.
Jeez Louise, I've never experienced negative temperatures at all, never mind -20. It's crazy.
it's pretty crazy. We have big swings. So we'll, on average, our annual low is around -10, -15 Celsius. And we'll in the summer sometimes hit 45. So we have a very big temperature range here in my part of the state.
Indeed, and I'm sure it makes for interesting plant biology and botany. So let's get into that. So tell us a bit about who you are, Dr. Baliga, and what you do in this moment.
So I wanted to start off by saying I like the way you ask that question. I've listened to a couple episodes now, and I like that you say, who are you and what do you do in this moment? Because we all have pretty winding paths to get to where we are, and life changes a lot. So that's I've not often heard that question asked in that way, and I like that. But yeah, I am a lecturer and greenhouse manager at Texas Tech University. So I teach introductory horticulture, one of the lectures in a lab, sometimes a couple of labs, and I manage our teaching and research greenhouse for the Department of Plant and Soil Science, as well as our horticultural gardens. So we have, a fairly large greenhouse, 8 greenhouse compartments, 4 classrooms, some other research facilities here, as well as about a hectare of horticultural garden that surrounds it. So I oversee that, work with student assistants to keep it managed and all of that. And then I teach in our department as well.
Okay. What sparked the idea of getting into plant biology, botany, horticulture? How did that whole journey come about?
It's interesting. So I actually, at least for my academic career, I started off in biomedical engineering. I wanted to be a doctor, design prosthetics. My granddad on my grandfather on my mom's side, as well as my grandmother, were both doctors. And so I did a year of that when I started my undergrad, and I realized I'm not very good at calculus, and I don't really like blood. And those things were going to be a problem in engineering and medicine.
For sure.
And so I was, 19 years old, and I felt like I had already, completely lost my direction in life. And so I talked to an advisor, and um, he just asked, "What do you like to do? What do you enjoy?" And some of my earliest memories growing up were gardening with my grandfather. And there's pictures of me at 2 or 3 years old growing corn and squash and tomatoes in the backyard, just playing in the dirt. And so I started to think, if I can't maybe follow his footsteps in medicine, I can follow his footsteps in the plant sciences. And so um, he was a doctor at a time when there were less regulations. And so I remember as a kid spending summers and other time with him at his clinic. And until he was unable to do so, his clinic was in a lower income part of the city that we live in, and he would accept vegetables or honestly whatever people could bring in as payment for his medical services. He would just, he would come home all the time with a basket of tomatoes and potatoes and onions and different things. And I think it always drove my grandmother crazy because potatoes don't necessarily pay the electric bill, but he felt like an inability to pay was not a reason, or to pay in a traditional sense was not a reason to deny someone care. And so he would take whatever people could give. And so growing up, I always, had this appreciation for food and plants and those kinds of things. And so I guess through that, I did my undergraduate degree in horticulture. I studied landscape design. My master's was in horticulture, studying, I guess, drought tolerance in production olive trees. And then I just finished my PhD in plant sciences, looking at urban water conservation. So in the urban setting, in the home landscape, all of that. How do we motivate people to save water, and what technologies can help us do that?
That's interesting. I do similar type of research, but on the far downstream. I'm an estuarine fish biologist. A recent concept that we've actually come up with in our technical reports and stuff is that we are trying to get this idea out that an estuary, a river, and even downstream into the coastal ecosystem also has a right to water, just like people have rights. And I think that's quite an interesting thing that I'm hoping gets some traction. Maybe people will understand that easier than to just say, okay, we need some water to flow down all the way down into the estuary so that the ecosystem can function.
I think that's very fascinating, and one of the messages we try to send through some of our water conservation education we do is that nothing we do exists in a vacuum, and the water you pump out of the aquifer or from a municipal system goes somewhere. It either goes into the ground where you put it, or it evaporates and blows away, or it ends up in a storm drain and eventually in a river. And so things we use in the landscape, like it's not even just a question of water quantity, but quality as well. So if we're using too many fertilizers or other products, pesticides in the landscape, that eventually ends up in a waterway somewhere. And so the message we try to send is not to not use water, but to be as efficient with it and as conservative with all of our resource practices as we can be, because everything we do is connected to something else, and we don't know sometimes the downstream consequences until much later,
and potentially until it's too late, and then everything's messed up.
Right.
So, well, one of the big reasons why you're on this podcast is I'm very interested in scientists who are using new media to convey and communicate their science. And you've gravitated towards podcasting and I think more recently TikTok. So how did the idea to convey your message through podcasting come about?
So I think in the grand scheme of things, am a fairly recent adopter of podcasts. It's only in the past 2 or 3 years, really, that I've listened to podcasts, been involved with them in any way. As opposed to a lot of stories you hear that someone's like, "Oh, I grew up listening to podcasts," all that. I got into it because a friend told me one time, "You need to listen to this Harry Potter podcast." And I'm, I think there's no question that I'm a nerd, so I'm not outing myself as far as that goes. But
this is a show for nerds and geeks, so don't feel shy.
Yeah. So there's a podcast called Potterless, where this guy, as an adult, goes back and reads through the Harry Potter books for the first time, and it's pretty funny, but it's interesting hearing that. I grew up reading those books, and so getting to hear that from a different perspective was interesting, and that kind of got me into listening to podcasts. And then I found a science podcast called Ologies, which is one of the biggest science shows now, in the world. But the host, Ali Ward, is a genius at science communication. She's brilliant in the way she approaches it from a casual and very approachable standpoint. And she talks to scientists on her show like they're actual human beings, which shouldn't be something that's revolutionary, but in a lot of ways it kind of is, right? We in society draw all these lines between the quote unquote public and the scientific community, when we're part of that same community. We just do different activities that generate information. And so I started listening to that show and started somewhere in the back of my head getting the idea that you could do something like this specifically in the plant sciences or natural sciences. And I was at the greenhouse I run. A friend was up here one day, and we were talking about a specific kind of tree, a mesquite tree, and how it related to life in this part of the world with the indigenous peoples that were here, and how they used it as a protein source and how they managed it and all of those different things. And at the end of this conversation, I was like, man, we're the biggest nerds, but I think people would love to listen to something like this. And so I said, we should start a podcast, and we kind of laughed about it, and it went away for a while. But a few months later, in late 2019, I started to think about it. I said, no, we unfortunately generate all this information. We have all this knowledge in the university setting, and we don't really do a great job of taking that and closing the feedback loop. The taxpayer pays for our research largely, and then we take that research and generate knowledge that we don't give back to them. And we do a lot of gatekeeping, and we do a lot of that kind of thing in academia. And I just thought it'd be a great way to take some of these nerdy plant conversations and interesting things I hear from my colleagues and different scientists and people in the industry, and tell that story of, one, what are we doing? What does the science say? But two, for someone in the industry, 20 years into their career, 5 years into their career, still in school, why do they care? Why are they passionate about it? What aspects of their jobs and of their lives keep them interested in the natural sciences and the plant sciences? And I felt that was a story we don't always tell our students well. We give them the information and maybe leave a little bit of a hole sometimes with, okay, what do you do with it? How do you go get a job? What job are you going to love for the rest of your life? That kind of thing. So I just wanted to talk and have casual conversations with people in the field, whether they're in industry or in academia, in everything from water to soils to food production and anything and everything else that I can find that's in between there. And I'm about a year and a half in. My university and department's been super supportive of it, and it's been really just a great experience.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that you've... Well, are they involved in any way, or they're just aware of the show? Do any of your colleagues listen in?
So that's a good question. I don't necessarily recommend doing things, and then asking for forgiveness later, but that is often how I do things. So I just started the show. I said, we'll see how it goes. And a couple episodes in, I talked to my department chair about it, and he said, I think this is a great idea. How can we support you? So they have been supporting in terms of equipment and podcast hosting and promotion and all of that. But also he said, if there's any ways I can help you better work with our faculty and our staff and our current and former students to get some of these messages out, we're using it in some ways as an interpretation tool and even a theoretical recruiting tool in our department. But he was very flexible, our department chair and our department in general, with the way I approach it. It wasn't just, you can only interview people at the university, you can only talk to these specific people. It's more of a tell a good story. And in that, if we can promote the things that we're doing, that's great. So he has been very forward thinking in the way we approach it. He's very passionate about making sure that we get the information out into the world however we can. And looking at the university's strategic plan for the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to become a bigger and bigger part of it, is like public outreach and interpretation of results and that kind of thing. So I've gotten a lot of great support from my colleagues, but as well as from our administration on that.
It's really cool. It's very open-minded and forward-thinking. I wouldn't even know how to bring this kind of stuff to my university management. I think some people are aware that I do podcasts and stuff, but obviously I'm not doing anything that's related to my field of study necessarily, so it's quite different. But still, I mean, the most in my opinion, that the university does is like newsletters. We have the local university radio station, email blasts, and the occasional article in the paper for whatever reason. But actual podcasting, making videos and stuff like that, I feel like, at least in my experience with South African universities, still in its infancy. And I'm hoping that it picks up throughout the world, not only here, because it is a very direct line of communication between researchers and investigators and journalists and the public that we haven't had, in the past decades, since before the advent of the internet. So it's really cool that university is quite involved.
Yeah, and I maybe struggle to say no to things sometimes, but our public media department is our local public broadcasting affiliate, right? So they do radio and television and now digital media more and more. And one of the radio producers from our affiliate's called KTTZ, Texas Tech Public Media, wanted to. So I've gotten involved in another show, I guess is what I'm kind of going towards. And this producer is a sort of a novice gardener. She is trying to learn how to grow a little bit of food, garden on her own, on a very small budget, right? How do you use recycled materials and all of those seeds, save seeds, all of those kinds of things. And she thought it would be cool to start a show where she sort of documents her journey into gardening, into growing her own food and all of that. So I've gotten involved with that sort of as a quote unquote expert contributor or whatever. And so she documents her process, and I come in and talk about the science behind it. But we are now talking about how do we produce like fun videos in relation to that. We're thinking about doing this. You've probably seen online, they do like reaction videos, right? Where somebody watches, and so we're thinking about doing some of that and watching some of these completely absurd gardening videos that pop up on Facebook and Twitter sometimes, and reacting to those, but then talking about, okay, here's some you can't turn a banana into a kiwi or whatever, but here's some actual gardening tips that go along with it.
For sure.
And so we have, I think, at our university right now, a really great team of people across the university that are trying to find new and innovative and exciting ways to tell the story of science and the story of what we do here. And it's really exciting. It's exciting to get to be a part of it.
Sure, that sounds pretty cool. I'll be one of the first to subscribe when it comes out.
Cool.
Plant reactions. So, like, what is a day in your life like? Like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? Because you told me you do some lecturing, but you're also a manager in a greenhouse. So how does that work?
It's a challenge some days. So I started with the university. I did my master's here at the same university, but after my master's, I went out, worked in industry, did a few different things, and started working on my PhD in 15, I guess. And so it's kind of a slow process, but a few years ago, this position came open for the greenhouse manager, and I decided to go for it. I was working full time. I've worked full time all the way through my PhD, and I was working for the extension service here in Texas. This position came up, and I had done all of my master's research in this greenhouse, and I was like, oh, how cool would it be to get to go and manage this place? It was like coming home in some ways. And so I ended up getting the job and, spent 2 years sort of finishing my PhD while working in this position. And then now I have taken on teaching roles. So I teach 2 days a week and then do greenhouse stuff the rest of the time. So I'm kind of on a 50-50 appointment. I keep a staff of student assistants here that honestly, and I don't tell them this too much so they don't try to get rid of me, but they're great. They could probably run this place without me if they needed to, except that they need my purchasing card to go get material sometimes. In general,
authorization. Yeah.
I've got a great staff. Yeah. And so I've got a great staff though that lets me do what I do. And so on a day-to-day basis, it kind of depends what day it is, but we our facility is primarily a teaching facility. And so we facilitate labs for our introductory horticulture class, which is also what I teach, floral design, entomology, weed and pest management, a few other things. So on a normal semester, which we will hopefully have again someday, I run about 500 students through my greenhouse every week. We have a pretty active teaching regimen out here, but we also facilitate a lot in-house and facilitate a lot of graduate student research and faculty research. So I like to say we teach our undergraduates about science, we teach our master's students how to do science, and then we teach our PhD students how to do science for themselves. And we facilitate all of that here at our facility. So on an average day, I may be working with my staff to get plant materials sourced and organized for our labs, or working on organizing our classrooms, the flow of the students through here, maintaining our teaching garden. But then I also help order materials, facilitate research, do some a little bit of experimental design assistance and those kinds of things with our graduate students and all of that. So everything we do is teaching. We just approach it in a different way. So I think of my job in general as how do I think of myself as an educator across the board, whether I'm teaching or working in the greenhouse. But my greenhouse responsibilities I think of as how do I create the best and most efficient learning and research environment for our students. And so everything we do out here goes towards that. Better displays in the garden, better equipment and facilities indoors, making sure our plant materials are cared for, investing in new technologies. And so I think of everything I do as education. I just have to approach it in a couple of different ways.
Do you use any new media, new technology in your actual teaching? Yet, or is it still old school?
We are having to, because of the pandemic, integrate some new technology tools. We had a former faculty member who retired a couple of years ago named Dr. Cynthia McKinney, who about at least 15 years ago, had the foresight to start investing in our department in distance education. So we were one of the first in the university to really pour time and effort into distance ed. And so if for years now in our department, you've been able to get a complete bachelor's and master's degree completely online through our department. And so when the pandemic hit and everything had to go online, we were kind of already set up to do it because we'd already been doing it for years. And
That's
so,
cool.
we use lots of videos. We do YouTube and Zoom communication. We try to teach through maybe not new media in terms of like podcasts and TikTok, but we integrate social media where we can. And I think try to provide an experience for our students where they're trained in the science, but they're also trained in interpreting and communicating that science as well.
Sure. You just mentioned TikTok, which is a relatively new social media, I think, on the landscape. How did you get into making content for that?
So I'm probably in the grand scheme of things way too, like I'm like twice the age of most of the people on TikTok. I'm in my 30s now. And I think just like so many people that have been stuck in quarantine for a year, I got bored and I was like, I'm going to try a new thing. I've always been a big fan of social media. I do a lot of social media between Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and I have for years. But TikTok was one of these things that I was maybe a little scared of at first because I was like, oh, I'm just the old guy. It's all kids doing stupid dances. And that was before I really got into it, right? Like I was of the Vine generation. So when Vine died and they were like, TikTok's the new thing, I think I was like the grumpy old man, like hanging on to the 6-second Vine videos. But no, but then I got bored one day and I was like, okay, I'm going to download the app. I'm going to see what's going on. And the content on there is so diverse, from, yes, the stupid dance videos and really ridiculous jokes to really funny, creative, clever, well-produced content to a whole lot of educational material. And I have always felt like education does not need to stay within the institution. I think if we're really doing our jobs, information needs to go to where the people are. And that's why I worked with Extension for so long, because I felt like it met that mission very well. But TikTok is, like it or not, that is where our next generation of academics and scientists and leaders in our community, that's where they are. Right. So they're not on Facebook. Facebook's not cool anymore. Twitter's kind of not cool anymore. Instagram is barely cool anymore. And so if we want to keep giving the right message and showing new opportunities to the next generation of people who are going to sit in our classrooms and stand behind the podiums and work in our labs, we have to take that information where they are. And so I'm a fairly recent adopter to TikTok. I don't know that I'm very good at it. I don't really have a very big following yet, but I am trying my best to produce, bite-sized content that that's funny as much as I can be, entertaining, but also delivers little like snippets of information. And, I'm working on making it as accessible as I can, making sure I'm captioning everything, doing all that so that the people that need to see that, hey, plants in the environment are still cool. Like we should still care about that stuff. I want the people that need to see it, that are our future decision makers, to see it now, before they make their mind up on what their worldview is like. I want plants and nature and science to be part of the next generation's worldview as they decide how to be adult, grown-up, decision-making humans.
For sure. And I think that, just like from a plain like marketing perspective, like if you just look at age groups, like the data is there and everybody's going to tell you that if you are targeted towards the younger generation, TikTok is where they all are, so it just makes sense, I think, from a data perspective. And I think, the whole perception, I think, from the older crowd is always that, just get off my lawn mentality that I think everybody gets as they get older. So, yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, if you wanted to aim your content at an older audience, you'd probably go to Facebook. If you want to aim your content at contemporary, you're probably going to Instagram and Twitter. So when it comes down to just the numbers and the data, it just makes sense. I think it just takes some people getting over themselves to realize that if they want to market to the younger audience, they're probably going to have to do it on TikTok. So I think it's a smart move. I haven't figured out how I would deliver bite-sized content myself, because I just like long-form content. I like consuming it, and I like making it. But I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's not a bad thing. I think about this a lot, that we try really hard as a society, generally as a global society, to make one size fits all solutions. And the fact of the matter is that not everyone is going to want to make a TikTok. Not everyone's going to be good at it. And I think that's fine. And I think we have to come to terms with that some people, you do an excellent job with long form media. I think your podcast is great, and the different content you generate is great. And I think that we need people doing the things that they feel most comfortable and most well suited for. But two, a variety of things, right? Not everyone that is really great on TikTok could put together a 45-minute podcast or a long form YouTube video. Those are different skills. I'm just one of these gluttons for punishment that I like to try everything and do a little bit of everything. Maybe I don't do any one thing especially well, but I try to be a generalist with my approach. But I think we need people that do that. And then we need people that really drill into the one thing they do and do it great. So, and I find that, I try, if a new social media pops up, I try it. And if I'm not good at it, after a while, I'll kind of abandon it. I use Twitter in a very specific way for some specific things, and Facebook for other things. I was on Snapchat. I'm technically on Snapchat. I kind of hate it. I don't know what to do with it. My brain doesn't work right for that. Yeah. So I don't, there are people putting out great content on Snapchat. It's not me, right? I'm going to try TikTok for a while. And if it's not working, I'll refocus my energies somewhere else. So I think we have to get to a place where we're not scared to try, but at some point we're also not scared to cut our losses, right? Mm-hmm. Not falling into this sunk cost fallacy of, I've put in a year of my life to making 60-second videos. I have 7 followers. Okay. Maybe those 7 followers are getting something out of it, but maybe I could refocus my energy where I have a better impact. And so I think the message I would send to our scientific community that sometimes gets bogged down in the way that we do things is give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, okay, you at least tried. There's no shame in trying and deciding that you're not good at something. But I think where we get into trouble is where we're just writing things off and unwilling to even try.
For sure. I totally agree with that notion. I think, some of the older academics do need to at least try to get their message out in new media. Because, otherwise it might never get out there, which is sad. So you mentioned that did you actually get into what your podcast is about? Did you describe it? What's the elevator pitch for Planthropology?
So I guess we really didn't. So Planthropology is how I normally start the show is that we dive into the lives, careers, and ambitions of cool plant people. And so I just try to find people that have interesting careers in plant and natural sciences. Those can be, again, academic careers, industry careers. They could still be students. It doesn't matter to me that much. And the show is focused more on the people themselves than the subject matter. Now, we do talk subject matter. We do talk science and plants and all that. But I'm more interested in the human story of why do people love what they study? Why are people interested? because we can give information about a topic all day. That human element of, gosh, I'm really into olive trees for X, Y, and Z reasons, and I love studying and I'm interested in them for this. That's more exciting and compelling to someone, I think, wanting to get into the field than just the science itself.
For sure. I mean, there's this notion that I've come across recently with my guests is that it's not necessarily like school that gets you into this type of stuff. It's usually something that's outside, like either a hobby or passed down from like in your case, passed down from an elder generation that gets you into this. And it's that story aspect that is actually more captivating than just getting thrown random facts. It's like how science is taught in school. So I think that's what the power of things like podcasting is, and new media is that storytelling aspect. And I think your podcast captures that.
Well, I really appreciate that, and we keep it laid back. It's very casual. I think the best review I ever got. It's not like I have thousands of them, but the best review I've gotten of the podcast to this date is the show is like overhearing a conversation between two people at a coffee shop. And that is exactly the vibe I'm going for, that like you're just listening in on a conversation between two people that are talking about what they do and talking about their lives. And that's the whole vibe I'm going for.
Yeah.
And, you mentioned storytelling and telling that story. I'm a book nerd. I have read like The Lord of the Rings more times than I like care to admit, probably. And I love the storytelling, and Sam Gamgee is certainly the gardener is certainly the best character. He's the hero of the story. but as humans, we have, long before we studied science, we told stories. And storytelling, I think, both in a fiction and nonfiction sense, is one of the most important things we do as humans for our society, for each other, because it tells the story of how do you survive? How do you do it? How do you excel as a human animal or whatever? And when we talk about science, we're telling the story of ourselves, right? We're telling the story of the universe explaining itself through us. And I look at it that way when we talk about science. The facts are great, but the way that those facts fit into the greater story of everything we see and experience and the story of ourselves, I think is far more important. The way that we apply that knowledge to the greater story of our universe, I think, is one of the most important things we can do as scientists.
For sure. And I liked the new concept that you have where you look at some plants and how they interact with cultures like over time. I think that also adds to the whole storytelling mechanism. But I was really fascinated. I can't wait to continue that episode about what was it? Not deprivation.
Caffeine. I talked about the most recent one was caffeine and how we've used. Yeah. So planthropology is sort of a fake mashup word I made between like plants and anthropology. And so I guess the part I haven't talked about is the overall goal through all these things is to talk about our human connection to the environment, right? And at the end of my first year of podcasting, so last, I guess, October, I got to interview a archaeobotanist or a paleoethnobotanist who studies like what people, like past peoples, ate in their agriculture and all of that. And I got to interview this researcher from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, as well as two of his undergrads. And that for me, ultimately, that was so exciting. I had so much fun doing that. And it kind of got my brain thinking about, okay, I should, really lean into this anthropology part of planthropology a little bit more. I'm not an anthropologist, but I am fascinated by the way that different peoples worldwide have used plants and as part of either their rituals or religious practices or medicinal practices, and or as something as simple as like, caffeine. How do you stay awake? What do we use to stay awake? And so far I've done an episode about plants related to the winter solstice. And we talked a lot about, European plant traditions and Northern European plant traditions. And then we've done the caffeine one, which was I tried to cover as much of the globe as I can. And I'm hoping as I go through this year, we're doing one episode of that a month. I can find people that, are part of some of these cultures and that we discuss and interview them about how, their culture specifically uses plants and those kinds of things. So I think that's, I appreciate you saying that, because that's something I'm really excited about working on.
I can't wait for the episode on like local cuisines and how they're made up from plants from all over the world. Like if you think about like Italian food and like where the components come from, like it's all over the globe. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite like mind-blowing plant facts that you enjoy telling people? Like what do you tell people to just blow their minds?
So I think the thing that gets people the most often is when I talk about how fruits are categorized, right? Where, I think it's funny that people talk a lot about, a tomato is a fruit. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's red but like when you talk about how a pumpkin is a berry, right? Or pumpkins, bananas, watermelons, several other things that you don't think are related in any way are all berries. And that, for whatever reason, when I tell people that, they like, it messes with people's brains, and I'm not really sure why. I guess maybe I'm just used to that fact, but I love to tell people that pumpkins are berries and then just watch their reaction. And it's especially, I don't know if it's globally, but in the US for sure, when fall comes around, everyone starts talking about pumpkin spice lattes. And one of my favorite things is to call them berry smoothies, fruit smoothies, and just like see people's reaction to that.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Yeah, when I remember reading that fact on the internet as well, my mind was blown, because it's just because when you think of the word berry, you just have this image in your mind about what that is, and that's so far removed from a pumpkin that I can see why.
Yeah, and a lot of the things that we call berries aren't even actually berries, like strawberries, blackberries, raspberries. None of those are actually berries. They're all different things. A strawberry is barely even a fruit, right? Like the actual quote unquote fruits on a strawberry are the seeds. They're called achenes, which is a dry type of fruit. And the red fleshy part is honestly just like a carrier structure for those seeds and for those fruits. And so like we call a strawberry even like either an accessory fruit or an aggregate fruit. And so yeah, it's not a berry. It's almost closer to a nut, and it's weird. But
that is weird.
But from a bit, I think I heard a quote one time that was, knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in your smoothie. And like, again, I think so much of this, there's some so really funny, interesting facts about plants. But then we get to take that one step farther and talk about how do we actually apply that to life. And that for me is so much fun, going through that whole process of discovery to wisdom.
So, like, what are you doing when you aren't working and thinking about plant things? You mentioned you enjoyed reading in your younger days, especially fantasy type novels, I suspect. What else do you enjoy doing?
I get into like campy sci-fi and fantasy. That's kind of like my guilty pleasure is just really crappy sci-fi. Really? Or I mean good sci-fi too, but like I really like if there's a book or a novel about like spaceships and like space opera kind of stuff, I will pretty much listen to it regardless of its quality. I don't, being in academia, I don't have a whole lot of time to sit down and read for pleasure anymore, but I do a lot of audiobooks while I'm working or I'm in the lab or whatever. I'm a musician. I play guitar and bass and a little piano. I am a woodworker. So I make pens and cutting boards and desks and whatever else. What else do I do? Photography is a big hobby of mine. I do I've really the past couple of years gotten into astrophotography and doing Milky Way pictures, and
That's cool.
I have this nasty habit of finding a hobby and then turning it into a business and I'm going to sell a pen. I'm going to do all this stuff. But photography is one of those things that is kind of just for me. I like to go out and spend time in the middle of nowhere, trying to take pictures of the Milky Way or stars or the moon or whatever else. And then I like to post them on social media and kind of just leave it there. It's fun that can be a thing that people buy a print every now and then because they want something specific, but that's one of those hobbies that I'm keeping just for myself. I really enjoy photography.
It's pretty cool. Taking pictures of pretty and fun things is, I think, one of life's great pleasures, because you get to immortalize a moment in time. I think one of the things I would like to know from my guests now that we've survived the year that was 2020 and all the unspeakable horrors that happened during that time, now that that year is over, what are you looking forward to for the next year?
I'm looking forward to traveling again, getting to go and just leave town for a few days, and I we probably technically could and wear masks and all that, but we when my wife and I travel, we don't like to go see a big city. We would rather go find a small town somewhere in the mountains and just enjoy a little bit of peace and quiet. But we're being pretty cautious because we don't want to, we're a fairly well-developed city where I live with a big medical system, and I'm really nervous about accidentally taking a pandemic to a little town somewhere where they don't have the infrastructure. And so we haven't traveled at all in a year and a half. And that's something we really like to do, is take road trips and all that. We're not too far from the mountains where I live, so we like to go and spend some time. So I'm really looking forward to, maybe hopefully by this summer, definitely this fall, getting to travel a little, and then having campus life kind of get back to normal. I enjoy working with students and having a greenhouse full of students and all of that. And I teach a face-to-face class, but it's in a 1,000-seat auditorium. So it is minimal engagement with my students because I'm literally on a stage teaching 100 students in a 1,000-seat room. And so I miss that student engagement and the student interaction. So yeah, personally, I'm really looking forward to getting to travel. Professionally, I want our students back in the classroom, getting to have that full experience again.
For sure. What are your top wish list destinations to get to that you haven't been yet?
We haven't gotten to travel a whole lot internationally. We've done some. I would love to go see the British Isles, Ireland, and I've been to England once, but get to see some of the. There's no trees where I live. I live on a grassland prairie, and so every tree here was planted. I just want to go see trees somewhere. I would love to go somewhere that things actually grow, and we want to do. I've never been out to California to see the redwoods. I would love to see that. I want to go to Yellowstone and the Great Basin area of the Western U.S. to find bristlecone pine trees. That's my favorite tree. And if you don't know anything about the bristlecone pine, they're thought to be the longest lived individual organism on the planet. We don't know how long they live because the oldest ones we found are 4,000 or 5,000 years old, and there's only almost certainly ones that are older than that. And so I would love to go see those in person and get to take some pictures of them. So in the US, probably, the redwoods. Internationally, I would love to see Australia, parts of Europe. My family's from India, so I've been there a couple times, but I haven't seen much of the country. So I would love to go travel some more in India and see places where my family's from and where my ancestors came from. So,
are your parents from India?
Yeah.
they
So
continue?
both of my parents were born in India. They moved here in the 70s. Or my mom and my grandparents moved here in the 70s, and then my dad came for grad school, I guess in the early 80s. And so I've been a couple of times to a couple of different places, but I want to see more of it. But I'm a first generation American.
Hmm. Cool. I think for the final question, like, where would you like to see the Planthropology brand go? Like, what's some of the things, the notes you would like to hit in terms of social media, audience, getting to do things, potential guests? Like, what would you like?
I think about this sometimes, and I obviously I would love to get tons of downloads and listeners and all of that. We're doing pretty well, but I'd love to see myself at the top of some of the science charts. I think everyone that does this would love to see that. But honestly, there's a couple of big guests in mind. We have a climatologist named Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who works at my university. I've been trying to get on her calendar for like a year now, and she's so busy which is a good thing. I'm glad she is. She's a great communicator, a great climatologist. I want her to be as busy as she can be, right? Telling the story about climate change and how we can save the earth. But I would love to interview her on the show. I would love to get to be a guest on more and more shows as time goes forward. But I also want to, some of the stories I want to start telling is I want to interview more like undergrads on the show, because we've only had a couple. And I would love to hear stories about people that are just starting this journey and how they got there and all of that. So yeah, I would love to land some big guests, but I also want to talk to more young students about what they do. And so, ultimately, yes, I think we all as podcasters, obsessively sometimes look at our analytics and downloads and countries where it was downloaded and all that. I think that's a curse we all kind of live with. But as long as I can keep telling good stories, I think I'm happy with what I'm doing. And I would love to be able to do more live stuff. That has not really been much of a thing since because of the pandemic since I started. But at least in my community, I'd love to be able to do more live shows and have people come to the greenhouse and like come to a live recording or something like that. So just kind of casting the net a little bit wider with my guests. And but yeah, at the end of the day, if I can keep telling good stories, I think I'm pretty happy with what I'm doing.
That's a pretty good outlook. And I wish you all of the best in your future endeavors.
I appreciate it.
And thanks so much for joining. Why don't you let our audience know where they can find you and your work on the internet?
Yeah, so I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter as different handles, but just search for Planthropology and look for the tree, and that'll be me. On any of those platforms, I have a Facebook group called Planthropology's Cool Plant People, which is a lot of fun. And then I have my, I guess, I don't want to say personal account, but my more academic account is called the Plant Prof, PROF. And so I'm on Twitter as the Plant Prof and also TikTok as the Plant Prof.
Cool. You managed to become the Plant Prof on Twitter.
I do my best,
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Baliga. It's been a fun chat. I think we'll, as you, both of our shows progress, I think I'll have you on again to see what you get up to in the future. But it's been fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it.
Cool. And thanks to the listener at home for listening. We hope you had fun learning with us today. Otherwise, stay tuned and cheers.